WBNE.
Hello, and welcome to episode 42, all about Minas Tirith, Chapter 1, Book 5 of The Return of the King, being the 42nd part of That's What I'm Talking About. Hello, my name is Mary Clay. If that's too complicated for you, just call me MC. And today I'm joined by Jenn Northington. She's the manager of editorial operations at Book Riot, as well as the co-host of SFF Yeah, a sci-fi and fantasy podcast. Welcome, Jenn.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. I thought as a Book Riot manager / editor and a sci-fi podcast host, I was like, hopefully I'm hitting some Venn diagram where she's also interested in Lord of the Rings.
I would hope so. Yeah, when I finally saw the notification, because of course, you know, the way that Instagram works continues to be a mystery to me. I got so excited just because I love the name of I love a pun. I love a fantasy pun. So, you know, the name of the podcast endears you to me immediately. And yeah, especially, you know, a deep dive into a chapter sounded like a lot of fun. So I am delighted to be here. I'm a Tolkien nerd from like way back. So
yeah, tell me a little bit about how you got into Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, so my mom read to us a lot when we were, I have two brothers, and she read to us a lot when we were kids, and she read us The Hobbit when we were really little, like complete with voices, and she sang the songs, like she decided, you know, musical sort of tunes for the songs in The Hobbit and the whole 9 yards. She also read us the Chronicles of Narnia. Like we got it all. And I was just thinking about this in the lead up to the show. I remember, I don't know if it was actually the first time I had read them or not, but I remember being on a family trip. I must have been like 11-ish. And I had gotten a set of the Lord of the Rings from the local thrift store that were these really old school covers. And I like felt so cool with my, you know, like 70s Lord of the Rings paperbacks. And I left the Two Towers on the plane the seat back. And my older brother was so angry at me because we were trading off who got to read what when. And also now the set was ruined and it was, you know, like a thrift store find. They didn't cost a lot, but like the emotional value was very high.
Yeah.
So
by any chance, was that copy of Two Towers, did it have Gimli on it and it looks like he has a mullet?
No, but now I wish that.
Because that's another very infamous, like iconic book cover that has been talked about. It's like legend now for this podcast, because one of my guests who comes on a lot has that version, and I can't remember. It's like Gimli and Legolas are on the cover, and it looks like Gimli's head has been like photoshopped almost onto another man's body, and I think either him or Legolas have a mullet, and it's like so iconically, I guess, 80s.
Yeah, so, that sounds. Is what's going to happen after we hang up is I'm going to fall down a covers rabbit hole. So that's definitely going to happen. No, this gave me a chance to dig out. I have a boxed hardcover set that was produced, oh gosh, I don't know, probably the early 2000s. And it's like very fancy and illustrated and, you know, like very sort of classic looking. And so I got to dig that out and read the first chapter of Return of the King in my fancy hardcover.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, one of these days I'm hoping that I'll have a dedicated office space and I can have a huge bookshelf, and I'll have an entire shelf just dedicated to having different versions of Lord of the Rings. Because
that is the dream.
There's some weird covers out there. And then there are also some like very beautiful editions made. And I want to own them all is the problem. Yeah. So
that is always the problem. Yeah, that's absolutely true. Yeah, this is the Alan Lee edition of the hardcovers. The Alan Lee illustrations are my favorite just because they're so sort of ethereal and like beautiful. But I mean, now I'm dying of curiosity about this mullet edition. So
I'll have to send you a picture of it once we hang up, because it's pretty good.
Yeah.
It's great. It's great. Well, listeners, this is it, y'all. We're here. This is Return of the King. I can't believe I'm starting this at last. As I went to a couple nights ago when I went to start this chapter, because side note, this chapter is long. I did not realize that at first, because a lot of the chapters in Two Towers are like 10 to 15 pages. This one's 23. I don't know. So I was like, oh, I'm not going to read this all in one sitting. I will lose my mind. And I went to pull it out, and I made a TikTok of me getting ready to read it, and it's set to O Fortuna. And I'm really proud of it. So I'm just sharing that was what was going on in my mind when I was pulling this off the bookshelf and opening it up. And I was like, it's happening. So this is chapter 1, Minas Tirith. I never know how to pronounce that correctly. How do you pronounce it?
Ooh, I have always gone with Minas Tirith, but I don't know why. I do not know why. Probably my mom. Probably that's how my mom said it.
Oh, also, I didn't even I didn't even jump in and say, that's so cute that your mom would do all the voices and songs and everything. That's so amazing and fun.
Yeah, she was my original fantasy nerd guide, and my dad, he was the one who had us watching Star Trek every week when it was on. So like I come by my sci-fi fantasy cred, from early days.
Yeah, that's great. It's like they knew that one day you would have a podcast about sci-fi and fantasy. Like, exactly. They're like, we've got to prepare her for life.
Every now and then they threaten to listen to the podcast, and I'm just like, please don't, or please don't tell me about it afterward. Yeah, and side note, I actually just finished rewatching all of the movies.
Yeah, a lot of people are doing that in quarantine life, and I'm very jealous because I can't watch the movies yet.
This was pre-quarantine. It just happened to be it was like mid-February before everything went to total
Shire
here in America. Ooh, sorry, bleep.
That's okay.
but yeah, it was pre, the full on situation. But it was kind of a trip reading this, because I had forgotten some of the not maybe huge differences, but I think important differences between choices they made, especially around Denethor in the movie versus in the book. So now I'm dying to get back in and reread all of them and be like, oh, that was different. Oh, that was different. So.
Oh, interesting. Because Denethor was, I guess I'll talk about when we get to him in the chapter. But from what I can kind of gather from what people have said is that for Two Towers and Return of the King, it's not so much that they changed what happened in the book. It's that they played a lot with the chronology of what happens in the book versus the movie, because it plays out a lot smoother in the movie than it does in the book, I think.
Yeah. I mean, that's a low bar, but yeah, I don't know if I should talk about it, because I don't necessarily want to spoil or
definitely
judge you.
Don't give too much away, but from what I think I can gather is that there are bits and pieces every now and then where it'll be oh, this was in Two Towers the book, but someone said this is actually in Return of the King the movie.
Yeah, the thing I'm thinking of specifically that came up in this chapter was a real choice to change how Denethor is handling a certain situation. I'll be vague about this. Okay. So they make a choice about how Denethor is handling a certain situation, and I think it makes his character a little less sympathetic in the movie. I mean, his character's great in the movie. The actor is fantastic. I think they really capture the spirit of Denethor. There were some choices made in the movie that make him even more sort of what's the word I'm looking for here? Even more of a control freak and a resisting certain things than he was in the book.
I can see where they might have just from this kind of brief introduction that we have from him here, I can see where they might have taken those aspects from him here and emphasized them for the movie. Because I got a lot of mixed vibes from him. I was like, I don't know how to feel about you, dude.
Well, yeah.
Are you good? Are you going to betray us 5 chapters into this thing? I don't know. I don't know what to do here. But this isn't about the movies yet. This is about this chapter 1, Minas Tirith. And it starts off with Pippin I love it. The first sentence is like, Pippin awoke from wrapped inside of Gandalf's cloak. And I just love that this epic book starts out with Pippin swaddled up like a baby in Gandalf's cloak. And they're riding on a horse. Shadowfax, I should say, of course. How could we forget Shadowfax? And they're rapidly approaching Gondor and Minas Tirith. And they notice that there are lights off in the distance. And Gandalf says that it is Gondor calling for help because there's obviously going to be a huge battle and a huge war about to begin. Gandalf starts telling Pippin about some of the history of the land, of course, classic Tolkien. We can't walk through a single field without him telling us the history of each blade of grass. But I like that it says Pippin became drowsy again and paid little attention to Gandalf telling him about the customs of Gondor. And I was like, same. Same. And then, this is also a great line. Gandalf says, if Gondor falls or the king is taken, then the Shire will be no refuge. And Pippin says, you do not comfort me.
Yeah, Pippin is not here to play.
Yeah, he's like, that's not a great thing, dude, for you to say. This isn't helping at all. Also, This is, you said when we were emailing back and forth, you were saying I have a lot of Pippin thoughts. And this is a great, just kind of a general thought. This is a great chapter for Pippin. He has a lot of character growth, and I almost have come to respect him, which is so funny because of all the characters for me to respect, I don't think Pippin would ever be one of them, because it's it's Pippin. It's fun, happy Pippin, Merry and Pippin. And this is a great chapter for him.
Yeah, I was remembering as I was reading this that this was the point at which I stopped being annoyed by him when I was a younger reader, because I was always a Merry fan. Merry was,
oh my gosh,
same. If you made me pick a Hobbit, it would be Merry, hands down, no questions. And, Pippin is always messing things up. He's just the, I don't even know if I thought he was funny. I was just Pippin, stop messing around, stop ruining everything. Now you've summoned the Balrog. What's wrong with you, Pippin? So annoying. And then you get this, and you finally start, and then he holds the stupid orb and reveals stuff to the enemy, right? He's always messing up. And this is the first time I can remember being maybe he's not the worst. Maybe Pippin is not the actual worst. Maybe he is just actually him getting separated from his friends is the thing that will wake him up a little bit and, have him take some responsibility and accountability instead of just faffing around all the time.
Oh my gosh. My mouth fell open because it's scary how similar our thoughts about Pippin are and because those are my exact thoughts too, is that up until now, I've really only enjoyed Pippin because it usually provides Gandalf with an opportunity to give a great one-liner at him.
Right.
And yeah, and so it's nice now that he's not annoying. He seems he's a very genuine character now, and he's come a long way since he's still a fool of a took.
Right.
But he's come a long way. He's a little less foolish and a little more tookish. I don't know.
Yeah,
maybe.
he's growing. He's growing. He's learning a little bit finally, and having to be on his own. He can't just fall back on the other hobbits to Merry's gonna clean up after him again. That's not an option anymore because he messed up one too many times. And so and also there are some really nice interactions between him and Gandalf in this chapter, which like you were saying, it's usually Gandalf yelling at him.
Yes. Oh, so, God, yeah. Where is it? I swear I wrote down at one point, this is weird. Gandalf is being nice to him? Right. I was who are these characters and what have they done with Gandalf and Pippin?
Right. I'm looking at the section where when they're passing through somewhere and they've been stopped by some guards and Gandalf is trying to get them through, and he says his name is Peregrine, a very valiant man. And it's just wait, who are you talking about now? Are you talking about the same Pippin? Are you right? And then Pippin's all insulted for being called a man. He's like,
Yeah,
I'm not a man, I'm a hobbit, yo.
Yeah, so Gandalf he's introducing themselves to these, I guess, guards into the land. This happens so often where he'll mention like 20 different descriptions of the landscape and locations and names of things. And I'm like, I still don't really know exactly where you are right now.
Right.
Because I don't think I think they're nearing the city is where they are right now.
Gondor has a lot of walls is I think what is the situation here. Like they have a lot of gates, a lot of walls that you have to pass through before you even get to the city walls. And so it's just one of many walls.
Right, yeah. So they come across all these guards, and for a second I thought we were going to meet Faramir, and I was very excited, but we do not meet Faramir. And yeah, so yeah, Gandalf says his name is Peregrine, a very valiant man. And then like kind of at the same time, one of the guards says, "Man," dubiously, and the others laughed. "Man," cried Pippin, now thoroughly roused. "Man, indeed not. I am a hobbit and no more valiant than I am a man, save perhaps now and again by necessity. Do not let Gandalf deceive you." So I love that he's like, I'm not a man, I'm a halfling. Thank you very much. Mm-hmm. So, and then he lets slip that Boromir is dead. And Gandalf is like, oh my god, why did you say that? We are about to go meet Boromir's dad, and he is not going to be in a good mood. And the guards are kind of like, I mean, we suspected that Boromir was dead, but we weren't 100% sure. Obviously, this now confirms it. And so Gandalf is very concerned throughout this whole chapter about what Pippin is going to accidentally say, because they don't want to reveal too much information to Denethor. It's a very like thin line they have to walk of. They have to tell him enough information that they get him moving and going and prepared, but they also don't want to say like, hey, by the way, Aragorn's on the way to take the throne.
Right.
And also your son is dead. And also the last interaction we had with him, he wasn't exactly great. He was kind of the worst.
The worst!
Well, Pippin doesn't know that part though, right? Like Pippin actually doesn't know that happened because...
Oh, that's true, right.
The last thing that he knows is that Boromir was defending him and Merry from the orcs and, got shot up full of arrows and died. And then they were carried off. So the only people know what happened with Boromir and Frodo are Aragorn and Frodo. I don't even think Gandalf knows. Unless, right. I guess it's possible that Aragorn told Gandalf.
I'm trying to think, because I'm trying to remember what happens, because this is like, oh my god, all the way at the end of Fellowship, which feels like years ago.
Yeah.
Oh, which, by the way, the end of Fellowship / the very beginning of Two Towers in the timeline of this book was 13 days ago. That feels like what we're experiencing now in like Corona time, where it's like, what do you mean it's been April for only 15 days? It's definitely been April for 17 years.
Yeah.
It's only been 13 days. That's madness to me. But so I think Boromir, he and Frodo have the like weird confrontation. And then Boromir, like, comes to his senses, is like, oh my god, I can't believe I did that. And then I think he comes, like, shuffling back to the group. And he doesn't come out and say, oh, I tried to take the ring from Frodo. But, or maybe, I don't even think he returns to the group. I think, like, after a while, everyone's like, oh, Frodo hasn't come back. And then I think that's what happens.
Yeah, and then all the orcs
And then they all split up, and then the orcs come. Right, yeah. So I guess the group doesn't know, but I feel like Gandalf knows, just because it's Gandalf.
Yeah, he probably knows, but he's sure as hell not going to say anything about it.
Exactly, yeah. So they enter the city. I just want to read off this passage because it sounds beautiful and wonderful compared to the four walls of my apartment that I've been looking at for the past 2 weeks. Then Pippin cried aloud, for the Tower of Thelion, sure, that's how we're going to pronounce it, standing high within the topmost wall, shone out against the sky, glimmering like a spike of pearl and silver, tall and fair and shapely, and its pinnacle glittered as if it were wrought of crystals, and white banners broke and fluttered from the battlements in the morning breeze, and high and far he heard a clear ringing as of silver trumpets. So they have arrived to Minas Tirith. And the city, it took me a bit to like understand how it was laid out, but I eventually had to make this metaphor in my mind of it's like a cake. It's a tiered cake, and it's like set against a mountain. Now all I want is for someone to make a cake that looks like Minas Tirith.
I will bet you money, by the way, that somebody has done that.
Oh, I'm sure.
Like surely somebody has done that. So here's a question I have. Are you a person who like goes back to check the map as things go along? You are? Okay. Because I like to look at the maps and that like, oh, this is a pretty illustration. But I really don't ever bother to like try to figure out like, okay, if they were here and then they were there, where are they now? And it never even occurs to me to be like, how is this city laid out? I'm just like, whatever. I like it. If it matters, they'll tell me. And if it doesn't matter, then who cares? Like, I don't need to know that. I'm so blasé about those kinds of details, and it stumps other people as well. Like, I always forget that, you know, not everybody reads that way. And it's really funny to me to even, because I just feel like, I don't know how you stop to like think about it. Like, because then you'd have to stop reading to think about it. And don't you just, like, my brain just wants to keep reading.
So it's, I go back and forth with this book with our dear friend Tolkien, because it's funny that you say like, oh, well, if it matters about where they are or the layout of the city, if that matters, they'll tell us. Except for with Tolkien, he will tell you no matter what. He will tell you if it doesn't matter. So it's hard for me to be like, because it happens a lot where I'll be reading and I'll be like, oh, the geography of this land and like where they are in relation to everything else doesn't matter at this point. And then I'll get a few pages ahead and I'll be like, whoops, actually it does matter. And then I'll like go and look at a map. And particularly I felt like it was not important, but it kind of made it easier when I was reading Two Towers, because the group was in so many different places and they were traveling like from one place to another, and it was easier for me to be like, oh, okay, so they were in this field and then they traveled up here, and oh, okay, that's where Helm's Deep is, and that's how far it is to Isengard, and things like that. But yeah, this one, I was like trying to figure out at the beginning of the chapter where they were, like as they were still traveling, and it got to a point I was like, what does it matter? They're going to Minas Tirith. I was like, I know where that is. It's a dot on this map. And what's funny is that, like, it's so close to where Frodo, Sam, and Gollum are in that, like, so it's like, meanwhile, in Frodo, Sam, Gollum land, I think at this point they are, like, in the Dead Marshes or, like, about to leave the Dead Marshes. And so, like, they are not too, and they're about to, like, they're pretty close. Like, obviously, none of them would have been like, oh, if we just ride our horses, you know, one day north, we'll find Frodo, Sam, and Gollum. Obviously, none of them know that. But, like, it's just funny to look at the map and be like, oh, they're, like, almost right next to each other. And they, like, don't even know it. So, but yeah, I agree with you. It's hard. It's hard. And
I just take the easy way out and don't care.
I know. That's what I do, especially when he goes into like, and by the way, here's the entire history of the land and the people who lived here and everything. Most of the time I'm like, oh, this doesn't matter. One time I was, it's the story of Beren
and Luthien,
and Aragorn is telling it. And I was like, I'm sure this dumb like folktale that he's telling has absolutely nothing to do with anything. And then like as I got further on, I was like, oh wait, that was actually like a metaphor for Aragorn's life, I'm pretty sure. But yeah, a lot of the times I do the same thing where my eyes will gloss over and I'll be like, I don't need to know about this or that or whatever, and then I'll be like, oh shoot, I probably should have actually read that a little bit closer.
I always read those bits, and mostly I like them. Every now and then I get a little like skimmy. Like I think actually at the beginning of this chapter when Gandalf is like, oh, it's he's naming places that the beacons are, or, he's giving some history to Pippin. If there's too many proper names, I will skim those because I'm not going to try to pronounce all of those in my brain.
Oh, right.
But,
Same.
But I think maybe just because I was exposed to it at such a young age, I don't mind the meanderings. Like it just like feels like that's what it is. Like if you don't have the meanderings, this is half of a book. This whole 3 trilogy is half of a book. And so it doesn't bother me, but I just meant like trying to physically like imagine, where things are in relationship to other things geographically, or, what the city's layout is like. That's where I'm like, whatever. I just can't bring myself to take the mental time to figure it out in my head. But I think that might just be laziness.
Okay, sorry, that was a very loud car on my street. Sir, you should be at home. We should all be at home right now. They are going through the city, and Pippin notices that, like, even though it's very pretty and like, white and shiny, he realizes that it's kind of slowly falling apart. It's very weathered. It's pretty empty, and there's, like, not a lot. There aren't like a bunch of kids running around. There's not a lot of like joy or anything just within the city. And he can tell that like something's happening. Like everyone in Minas Tirith knows that something is about to happen. And later I think we find out that it's actually been in the process of like being evacuated. All of the like old people and the women and children, and that's why it's so empty. This is where I meant to go back into Towers and read. It's at the end of book in the Palantir chapter, and Gandalf gives this like poem or song or whatever it is about the orb that Pippin had looked into and had been like possessed by Sauron or whatever happened there. And it has the line 7 stars and 7 stones and 1 white tree. And Pippin notices that there's like a single dead tree kind of in the center of town, just sitting there wilting, and it looks gross. And he's like, that's kind of weird that they just have this one dead tree that amongst all these beautiful, like very alive trees. I wonder what that is. And then he mentions like this line of 1 white tree. And I was like, I'm guessing that dead tree is the 1 white tree, whatever the significance of that is. I don't exactly remember.
I mean, if you're going to be more bound to the text anyway, Pippin doesn't know what it means either.
This is true.
Like we're getting Pippin's perspective here. He has no idea what the significance of the tree is. All he knows is that Gandalf said some poetry about it. So, in that regard, you're just on the same page as the character.
Right? Yeah. And that's why I'm thankful every now and then that these stories are from the perspective of hobbits, because usually at any given time I understand as much of what's going on as Pippin does. Mm-hmm. So that's always good. So they approach the, I don't want to say castle, tower. They're approaching like where the king would be and where the lord is. What would you call that? They go inside a fancy building, a very official building. I just don't know what the word is.
The Citadel, right?
That's it. Yeah, that's the great word for it. And as they're walking in, Gandalf says, "Be careful of your words, Master Peregrine. This is no time for hobbit pertness." Gandalf says, "Don't." This is where he reminds him and says, don't say too much, especially do not mention Aragorn. Merry and Pippin, all of the hobbits really hold Aragorn up like in the highest regard. And they're like, what? But Strider, he's amazing. He's our favorite. Why would I not talk about him? I love this line from Gandalf. "It is scarcely wise when bringing the news of the death of his heir to a mighty lord, to speak over much of the coming of one who will, if he comes, claim the kingship." And it's like, all right, Pippin, let's think about this, bro. You're about to tell this guy how his favorite son died brutally. I don't think this is the time to mention that, by the way, there's someone coming to take the throne of this land that currently I think Denethor is like the highest power or highest control over Gondor currently, because Aragorn is not king.
Yet,
yes.
Well, so that's the best part. I mean, first of all, Pippin has no idea what Gandalf is talking about. Is my favorite part of this. He's like, what king what? Like, why would Strider be king of anything? Like, as far as Pippin is concerned.
Yeah, it says, kingship, said Pippin, amazed. Yes, said Gandalf, if you have walked all these days with closed ears and mind asleep, wake up now. He's like, seriously, how have you made it this far without picking up on the fact that Aragorn is going to be the king of Gondor?
Yeah, it's great. So, I mean, he just is so clueless, which is, you know, par for the course with Pippin, like 100%, like is only concerned with second breakfast and amusing himself. Like that's, you know, these are Pippin's priorities. And although, again, he's growing, he's learning. But yeah, I just love how clueless he is about all of those things.
So they walk into this hall, and there are a lot of mentions of like black marble or black stone. And because Tolkien is usually pretty like straightforward when he's like, oh, the bad thing is black and the good thing is white. So it's always very tricky whenever they enter. I think this happened when they were meeting Theoden. There were a couple mentions of like something being black. And to me, that's always a tip off of like, something is suspicious here.
Don't be suspicious.
I don't completely trust the situation. Like I mentioned a couple minutes ago or at the start of this episode of like, I don't know what to make of Denethor exactly. Granted, this is only the first chapter that like we're meeting him and interacting with him. So I'm sure I will make up my mind as the book moves forward with him. Yeah, so they enter, and this is talking about Denethor. Pippin saw his carven face with its proud bones and skin like ivory, and the long curved nose between the dark, deep eyes. And he was reminded not so much of Boromir as of Aragorn. Dark indeed is the hour, said the old man, and at such times you are wont to come, Mithran dear. So I love that he's like, great, you're here, Gandalf. Amazing how you seem to only show up when things are terrible.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Gandalf gets it from the guards, too, on his way into Gondor. Everybody's just like, oh, no, Gandalf is coming. That means nothing good for any of us. And he's always just like, I come when it's important.
It's like, and this is important.
Right.
It's like, it's not my fault that I only,
right.
Maybe something important will happen soon. That's good. I don't know.
Don't hate the messenger.
Exactly. Denethor is holding the broken horn of Boromir's. And so he has obviously learned by now that Boromir is dead. And he says that he wishes Faramir had gone in his place and had died instead of Boromir, because Boromir is his favorite son for whatever reason I do not understand, because Faramir is definitely the better of the two brothers in my mind, because Boromir is the absolute worst. And it's like God was making the brothers. And first he made Boromir and he's like, oh crap, I really went heavy-handed on the stubbornness and everything. I think I'll dial it back on the next one. And then he made Faramir and it was so much better.
Yeah, I think as I get older, I have a little bit more sympathy for Boromir, but also he does just make the absolute worst choices.
Yeah. And then he also mentions, since Pippin is walking in, he also mentions that, like, they're talking about halflings. And he's like, oh, I hate halflings because they're the ones that brought my son out onto this journey where he died. So it's like, okay, so right off the bat, he hates halflings, or at least doesn't have any positive association with them. He wishes Faramir had died instead of Boromir. And he's mad that Gandalf is only showing up when there's trouble brewing. So it's just like, not a good start. To this. Not a good first impression, to say the least. So Denethor kind of confronts Pippin and asks him what he knows about the horn and everything. And Denethor mentions that he heard the horn blowing off in the distance 13 days ago, which is how we know that it's been 13 days since the end of Fellowship. So Denethor kind of interrogates and intimidates also Pippin. And asks him about Boromir, and Pippin says, "He died to save us, my kinsman Meriadoc and myself, waylaid in the woods by the soldiery of the Dark Lord. And though he fell and failed, my gratitude is none the less." And then Pippin does like a very brave, like valiant, noble thing that really surprised me. He takes out his sword and lays it at the feet of Denethor and like pledges his loyalty and service to Denethor and to Gondor, and basically be a soldier in their army, which is just hilarious because Pippin is small. We learn later is smaller than a child.
Okay, but small but mighty. Let's not forget our
That's
Shakespeare.
true.
Like,
That's
hobbits
true.
are. He has already been through Whites and Isengard and has hung out with Ents. Like, and he's a little taller now since the Ents, right? So
That's true. Maybe he's grown a little bit.
Size isn't, the determiner of valiance.
Yeah, it was just. I wrote down, what a nice moment for Pippin. It's very. Just a great moment for him to be like, yeah, I'm stepping up, I'm taking charge, I'm showing my gratefulness for Boromir. So, people have been telling me all this time that I've been reading and complaining about Boromir. Oh, just wait, he gets redeemed. And I'm wondering if this is if this is what people are thinking of when they're like, oh, he is redeemed. And I was like, is he redeemed because he saved the hobbits? Because I thought that was implied. Like, I've been reading these with kind of the knowledge or the assumption that Boromir died trying to protect Merry and Pippin. So that changes nothing for me in my opinion of Boromir at all.
Yeah, that's the only real redemption that I can think of. Like, that is supposed to, be his making up for his ill-advised attempt to take the ring.
Yeah.
And that's not enough for you?
I mean, it's a very nice gesture, but still not enough. It's not even that. It's mostly just that like people were really bugging me about like, how could you hate Boromir? He's the greatest character. He's so brave and nice, and and I was like, what? I was like, are we reading the same books here? I was like, I don't think he's completely awful, but he's definitely not great.
I don't know. I have yet to meet somebody who's like, oh yeah, Boromir's awesome. So I have not had that conversation. I would be curious to hear the logic on that one. The other thing that I was thinking is that it could also be that some people find that getting a full view of Denethor tells you a lot about why Boromir is the way he is. You could argue that, daddy issues, as it were, have shaped him in a lot of ways. And so that also might be part of the belated complexifying of Boromir's character. But yeah, in terms of actual things that are redemptive for him, I think it's really saving Pippin and Merry is the thing.
That part, honestly, though, confuses me when people are like, oh, you'll understand his character more when you meet his dad. So that made me think, oh, he's like the Zuko character, and his father has outcast him and he hates him.
Once I deliver the Avatar to my father, he will welcome me home with honor and restore my rightful place on the throne. So
it confused me when we find out that Boromir is it's widely known that, which by the way, poor Faramir, that it's just
speaking of a
common
Zuko
knowledge.
Character, if anything, Boromir is more Azula than Zuko, and Faramir is much more Zuko.
It doesn't make sense to me that Denethor's favorite son is Boromir, and people are like, and that's why Boromir has issues, and it's like, I don't get it. He was his dad's favorite.
Well, there's a lot of expectations that come with being the favorite, right? I'm not saying it's not worse for Faramir. I absolutely think it is to have your dad be like, you should have died instead of my other son. That's not great. That's not okay.
Poor dude.
But I think that, you know, living up to your father's expectations, whether you believe you're succeeding or not, is a great deal of pressure, especially when, you know, your dad is the steward of Gondor and a lord and very important, et cetera, et cetera. And the fate of the world is, you know, involved. So, but I don't think it excuses anything. And I don't think it, you know, does that much more to change his dynamic. I just wonder if that's what people are thinking. That would be my guess. Yeah, is what I'm saying.
I could see that. I just thought I'd jump in here and add that, like, on my journey of Boromir the character, this didn't redeem him for me, y'all, and I'm sorry if that makes you mad, but you can talk about how much you love Boromir on your Boromir fan cast.
There you go.
After Pippin's little, like, swearing in ceremony almost, Gandalf says, "Okay, this was fun and all, but, like, I didn't come all this way, and Shadowfax didn't run for, like, 5 days straight for us to just swear in a hobbit to your army. We have, like, important issues to discuss." And Denethor and Gandalf have, like, this weird tension. And they have like a stare down almost. It says, "Denethor looked indeed much more like a great wizard than Gandalf did, more kingly, beautiful, and powerful, and older. Yet by a sense other than sight, Pippin perceived that Gandalf had the greater power and the deeper wisdom and a majesty that was veiled." So while Gandalf and Denethor are having this like weird stare down, kind of, Pippin's also just standing there like, I wonder how old Gandalf is. Literally just says, it goes, "And he was older, far older. How much older?" he wondered. And then he thought about how odd it was that he had never thought about it before. And I'm like, oh my God, Pippin.
The most clueless.
Oh, Pippin. So Denethor says that they're going to sit down and have some tea and cakes. And he's going to ask Pippin all about his journey so far in his travels with Boromir and what they've done and everything. So they sit down and Pippin tells him all of this story. And it says, "All the while conscious of Gandalf at his side, watching and listening, and so Pippin felt, holding in check a rising wrath and impatience." And it becomes, well, I should say, Gandalf is later like, "I see what you're doing here, Denethor. You're not," he's like, "I understand why you're interrogating Pippin and not me." And I was like, I don't. Can you explain it to me? So Denethor's like tactic for some reason is to interrogate and talk to Pippin, who obviously doesn't know nearly as much as what's going on as Gandalf does. And Gandalf clearly can like see this is clearly happening. He's like, okay, Denethor is not asking me anything and is not talking to me because, I don't know, he wants to avoid the problem somehow.
Well, I think it's craftiness. I mean, I think it's clear that Gandalf is only going to tell Denethor the things that he wants to tell Denethor, and Denethor is not going to get anything out of Gandalf that Gandalf doesn't want to tell him. And he's like, well, here's this other, you know, clearly not a wizard at the very least. Probably I can browbeat him into telling me things that Gandalf might not want me to know, which Gandalf has already told Pippin, you can't tell him everything. But, like, Denethor, I think, is wise enough to know that Gandalf's not going to give him the full story. Right. So he might as well try to get what he can out of this relative bystander, as it were.
That makes a lot more sense. That's a great point. That, like, he might inadvertently learn something from Pippin that he won't learn from Gandalf.
Exactly.
And at the end of this conversation of Pippin telling him all about Boromir and everything that's happened so far, Gandalf like calls Denethor out and is like, I see what you're doing here and I'm not having anything of it. We need to talk. We need to have a serious conversation. Denethor is like, nope, I'm good. And they end their meeting there. And so later, after their talk, Gandalf tells Pippin that like, oh, well, in the telling of your story, even though you did a good, because Pippin act like a cute little child. He's like, did I do good? He's like, did I do a good job of not completely spilling the beans about everything? Gandalf is like, well, there was no way for you to hide the fact that it wasn't Boromir who was leading the fight in Moria, and that you were traveling with someone of a very like high regard, like Aragorn, and that Denethor was able to figure out those things, but that was it. So in terms of Pippin, like, that's pretty good. He didn't let anything slip other than like those couple like random contextual things that kind of piece together the journey that they've been on so far. And then this is another thing that I was kind of confused about. Gandalf says, talking about Boromir and Denethor and everything, it says, whatever be his descent from father to son, by some chance the blood of Westerness runs nearly true in him, as it does in his other son Faramir, and yet did not in Boromir, whom he loved best. So what does that mean? That the blood of Westerness runs in Denethor and Faramir, but not Boromir. I don't know if you know what that means, or if you're allowed to reveal that.
Right. So I think it's a callback to like the lineage of Gondor, and, you know, Denethor comes from a line that they're not the kings, but they were pretty close to being the kings. So like they're part of the royalty of Gondor. And I think what Gandalf is saying is that like that blood is very, like, it comes with some powers of some, like, mental powers, as it were, of discernment or nobility, or, you know, it's this old, like, I think very outdated idea that, like, you know, blood will tell, like, that you can inherit wisdom or, you know, qualities from your heritage that you might not otherwise have. And I think he's like, this is his dig at Boromir. He's like, yeah, Faramir's smart and wise and all that jazz, but Boromir clearly did not get any of that. Like, it skipped right over Boromir, even though Denethor loves him the most. That
kind of adds to context. I also read the SparkNote summary for this. And it very, like, nonchalantly mentions, it was like Denethor, who has the power to read minds. Yeah. And I was like, what? Yeah. When did they mention that at any point in this chapter? I was like, I'm glad I read the SparkNotes, I guess, but, like, because I completely missed that. Is that what is being referred to here? That he can read minds and Faramir can too?
I mean, the line right in this same bit is he can perceive, if he bends his will thither, much of what is passing in the minds of men.
Oh,
of those that dwell far off.
I didn't think that meant literally.
Well, I think again, I think saying that he can read minds is a stretch. Like, I don't think Tolkien was like, yeah, they're telepathic, it's fine. Like, I don't think that's what's happening there. But I think what I would say, my interpretation of it, is that, yeah, Denethor is super sharp, and, like, maybe in the way that, you know, I don't know, like, con men is, like, a bad example, but that's what I'm going with. Like, can, like, read people and tell, like, are they lying? Are they telling the truth? What do they want? What is their body language telling me? Like, that kind of stuff. But, like, maybe a little bit more than that. But he's not, like, straight up telepathic. Like, he's not a straight up mind reader.
It just made me laugh. I was like, okay, SparkNotes.
I mean, listen, like, yeah, exactly. It's like, go home, SparkNotes. You're drunk. Like, that's not actually what's going on here.
Man, yeah, so I was like, all right then, that's quite a thing to learn via SparkNotes. Also, like, I 100%, if I had been, like, reading this in high school and was writing an essay, that definitely would have been a thing that, like, my teacher would have been like, yeah, your essay was great, but I had a question about this. Where is it in the book that Denethor can read minds? And I would be like, I don't know, SparkNotes said it. So Gandalf tells Pippin that they have to be careful. He was like, that was a very valiant, noble thing that you did of offering your service to Denethor and to Gondor. However, that was also a big mistake, because now Denethor has some kind of, like, power and control over you, and we have to be very careful about that. Yeah, he says, you are at his command, and he will not forget. Be wary still. And that's just a very classic Gandalf, vague, ominous statement of, like, be wary. Anyway, I'm gonna leave again.
Yeah.
And his parting words before he leaves Pippin to be on his own for the rest of the day. I highlighted it only because it's like, this is just scarily relevant. Well, no need to brood on what tomorrow may bring. For one thing, tomorrow will be certain to bring worse than today for many days to come.
Oh.
And I'm like, yep, that's where we're all at right now.
Yeah.
Of like, for many days, it's going to be like this for many days to come. Oh, and then as he's leaving, Gandalf, of course, asks Pippin to go check on Shadowfax, which is his number one priority, let's be honest.
Obviously.
So later, a guard comes by named Baragond. Is that his name? Baragond shows up to tell Pippin all these passwords that will get him into, I guess, secret places in the city and to kind of show him around. And he asks him about Gandalf, and I love this that Pippin says. He says, I kind of know Gandalf, but not really. But there is much to read in that book, and I cannot claim to have seen more than a page or two. And I love that metaphor of that, like, Gandalf is a huge, long book, and even though this is, like, an important chunk of his life that's happening right now, I barely know what's happening with him.
Yeah, it's a great line.
So Baragond takes, of course, Pippin's concern is food. And he's like, I haven't had food yet today. When are we going to have second breakfast and elevensies and all those fun meals and stuff? And Baragond is like, oh, well, usually our soldiers just have like a little bit to eat in the morning. Yeah, we've already eaten a while ago, and usually no one's going to eat for a while more. It's going to be a lot longer. Pippin's like, I don't know about that. And Baragond reads his mind and is like, don't worry, we'll go get food. So they go to like a little pub, kind of, have like a nice charcuterie board of like cheeses and apple slices and bread and butter. And I was like, that sounds like a delicious snack. Pippin tells him of like his journeys so far. And they talk about Gondor and the Shire. And honestly, this whole section is just a lot of talking about like kind of what we were talking about earlier of they're talking a lot about the logistics of the city and the soldiers.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the Asgiliath stuff is sort of important. Like, Pippin learns a little bit more about that. And we do know, well, I know that that's important. I don't know. This is where we get back to it. I'm like, do you know that that's important? Did I just like spill some beans? Anyway, Asgiliath
you didn't.
it is going to be important again. I mean, Frodo and Sam were already there. Yeah. Right? No, they're not.
I don't think they go to Osgiliath. They are not there in Two Towers.
Okay. All right.
Or are they? I don't know. I know about like the history and kind of like the legend of it, I guess. The kind of like the historical context surrounding it as it pertains to the story. So they're looking like off into the distance and talking about this battle that's going to happen and everything that is to come, and Pippin's like, this is awful. This, like, just the anticipation of knowing something crazy and bad is about to happen. Pippin says, now everything seems to have slowed up again. Only because everything is now ready, said Baragond. It is but the deep breath before the plunge. And I love that line. It is the deep breath before the plunge. Which is just like another poetic way of saying the calm before the storm.
Yeah, it's good. It's good. I liked Baragond. I was like, oh, this is a new person. He's interesting. He seems nice. And then it gets even better, right? So
yeah, they have like a nice little like camaraderie. And everyone, all of the later on when they go to lunch, like all of the soldiers are fascinated by Pippin because he's a hobbit. So he's different from their normal life and what they're used to seeing and everything. And they just want to hear his stories. And it's just funny because it's like Pippin is up until now, he lived what he assumed was like such an ordinary, boring life. And then now all these people are like, tell me about this and this and that because your life is so interesting to us. So off in the distance, is this where they hear? No, they just have like a moment to sit together and feel down and ominous and kind of, this happens a lot in this story where everyone will just like get a feeling. They get like a bad feeling because some kind of like darkness will pass over them. There was this one line where Tolkien does this a lot where it's like there's a very blurred line between this is a fantasy realm and a fantasy war, and then him bringing in his own experiences from the war. And this line, this is a great war, long planned, and we are but one piece in it, whatever pride may say. And that seemed like such a very realistic thing of like, people could talk about how great this war is and it's, you know, bigger things are happening here, all they want, but like, we're just a tiny cog in what's happening right now. And that's a very like scary thing for them to realize. And Baragon also says, and now all realms shall be put to the test to stand or fall under the shadow. And it's like, just very ominous.
Yeah, he's not exactly, I mean, he is a cheerful kind of person, but also he's very aware and realistic, which I appreciated, you know? Mm-hmm. It's a nice balance, I guess.
Yeah, it's not like false hope or false optimism.
Right.
And, oh, that's right. Okay. So they do hear, because this happens so much in the books where they hear like screeching or screaming off in the distance that I'm like, does this happen here or later on? But it happens here. This is Pippin. He shuddered and hope seemed to wither. And even at that moment, the sun for a second faltered and was obscured, as though a dark wing had passed across it. Almost beyond hearing, he thought he caught, high and far up in the heaven, a cry, faint but heart-quelling, cruel and cold. He blanched and cowered against the wall. That's like this sign that like it's happening, it's coming, this force of darkness and evil from Mordor and Sauron is approaching us.
I always read that as literally one of the Morgals are like riding over on one of their winged beasts. Like,
oh yeah, I think it was that too. Yeah.
I was like, it's a literal like, you know, horror beast flying overhead, making everything feel terrible. But also, I mean, there is also obviously the metaphorical, like not so metaphorical, the ominous threat of Mordor is there too.
To me, I kind of saw this as like their first like visual, actual physical sign of like, all right, things are kicking off now.
Right. I got you.
There was like some whiplash here where they go from being very like dark and ominous to being pretty optimistic and hopeful in like the snap of a finger, because right after this like moment passes where they're both like overcome by fear, I guess. And Pippin says, we may stand, if only on one leg, or at least be left still upon our knees. And they kind of regain their courage and their strength to kind of carry forward and onward. But Pippin still has in the back of his mind this one thought. Earlier, Gandalf was saying that like Denethor is playing a game and he has the board all set. And Pippin thinks, a pawn, did Gandalf say? Perhaps. But on the wrong chessboard. And I liked that. Mm-hmm. Pippin's like not sure if he's in the right place.
Yeah. Again, character growth. So nice. So refreshing.
I know. Oh yeah, this is when they go to lunch and they have with more of the soldiers or something, or maybe it's dinner. I can't remember. I don't know what meal it is because they just eat whenever. I was really proud of Pippin here because he's having like a grand old time telling stories and talking to all these people. He's drinking ale and having a lot of food. And it says, indeed, his only trouble was to be wary, according to the counsel of Gandalf, and not to let his tongue wag freely after the manner of a hobbit among friends. So I was pretty proud that like Pippin was here talking, having a nice lunch or dinner or whatever. He's drinking and he didn't let anything slip. Like, good job.
I know. He can be taught.
Oh, and they call him, that's right, I highlighted this. They call him the Prince of the Halflings, the companion of Mithrandir. And that's just so cute.
It is pretty solid.
They think he's like this big, important, as Pippin's like walking around town and everything because he and Baragon, I keep forgetting his name, have to part because Baragon has to go do something and he says, oh, you can go see my son. He's like down by the dock somewhere. You can go hang out with him if you want some company. And as Pippin's walking around, everyone calls him the Prince of the Halflings, the companion of Mithrandir. So Pippin goes down to find Baragon's son, Birgil or Burgil.
Yeah, who knows?
Burgil? I don't know. And he is a 10-year-old boy. I thought when Baragon was talking about his son is still in the city, I thought he meant like his teenage son or his like young adult son. So he's essentially set Pippin up on a play date.
Yep.
And Virgil is like, who do you think you are? He's like, oh, how old are you? I'm 10 years old and I'm 5'1". And Pippin's like, I'm not a man. I'm a grown hobbit. I'm not a child. And Virgil and his like friends don't believe him. And Pippin is like ready to challenge them to a wrestling match to prove that he's not a child, which I just think is great and hilarious.
It's a really fun moment, like a very nice, lighthearted moment.
Yeah, it is very nice to have this bit of lightheartedness in the midst of, you know, ominous presence hovering and charging forward towards where they are. Burgle and Pippin like run around the city and just like have a fun time together. And like I said, it's like a play date.
Yeah, that is a really good way to describe it.
And Burgle is really impressed because Pippin can get him into certain parts of the city that him and none of the other boys, I think all of the boys actually are coming with him. So it's just Pippin with like a gaggle of 10-year-old boys just running around the city. They hear this trumpeting, and old Forlong the Fat, the Lord of Lorsarnach, sure, is coming to Minas Tirith. And thus begins a very long parade of like, oh, they came with 300 soldiers, and this lord or whoever came from this land with 500 soldiers. And like, and each time they mention like a new person coming, they say like, oh, that's not as many soldiers as we would have hoped. But once you add it all up, it says 3,000. Yeah, or less than 3,000's full told. No more would come. So, I mean, but that still sounds like that's not nothing. You know, I feel like they at least stand somewhat of a chance. Granted, I haven't seen the other armies yet, but I feel like that's a good number.
I mean, I think it's interesting here because I feel like what Tolkien is telling us is that, and it wasn't even 3,000, is supposed to be our cue that like, oh, this is not enough. Like this is like, that's how many soldiers the enemy has. This is nowhere near enough, which is it's pretty grim.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at that of like, this is a lot of soldiers. And even though it's a lot, it's still probably not enough. Yeah. That's like a good way to look at it. Everyone's coming to the city to prepare for a battle that will be happening, I'm sure, in a couple chapters. Because I think the next chapter, we jump back, to Aragorn and Merry and Legolas and everyone else. So I guess we'll see what happens here in the future with that battle and those soldiers and stuff. So Pippin goes back to his little...
I don't remember how long it takes to get to that battle, to be perfectly honest.
Oh, yeah. I'm conflicted because I went to like go to my table of contents and read the names of the chapters, which is what I did for Fellowship and Two Towers. But like it gave away a lot of stuff. Because in Two Towers, there's a chapter called like The Voice of Saruman. And I was like, okay, so obviously we're going to meet Saruman in this book. So I'm trying not to like look too far ahead and be like, I don't want to like learn any new information that might like give something away, or I don't know, make me try and like go into a chapter with a certain frame of mind so I'm trying to go in as blindly as possible at this point. But I'm assuming, I hope that a battle happens soon, because if not, there's just going to be a lot of chapters of them waiting around for a battle to happen.
Yeah.
Especially with the last line when Pippin goes back to his little house where they're staying, and Gandalf comes home later and tells him to go to sleep and try and get some rest while he can. And this is the last line of the chapter. Gandalf says, "The darkness has begun. There will be no dawn." Like, how ominous and
pretty bleak
and creepy is that? So like that makes me think that something's gonna happen soon, and like this is it. But I also am confused because like this is just the first chapter of this book. Like there's maybe 200 more pages left for things to happen. Maybe there will be several battles. I don't know. We'll have to see.
I shall say nothing.
I should have told you at the start of this episode, but you can always plead the fifth and just not respond to anything I say. Yeah, so that's the end of this first chapter of The Return of the King. Do you have any thoughts or something that you didn't get to, something we might have passed over that you didn't get to share?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think it's actually a chapter in which things happen, which is nice because you don't always get that. And
that's always nice.
And you do get some interesting character development from Pippin and Gandalf, and you meet Denethor. So yeah, it's actually a pretty solid packed chapter.
Definitely. So before we wrap up the episode, where can people find you on the internet?
Yes, so you can find me podcasting for Book Riot. I'm actually on 2 podcasts in addition to the sci-fi fantasy podcast that we do, which is called SFF Yeah, as you said at the top. I also do a podcast called Get Booked with Amanda Nelson as my co-host, and we do book recommendations for people who write into the show, which is super fun. So there's sci-fi and fantasy, but lots of other things as well. And then you can find me on Instagram mostly at I am Jenn IRL, JENNIRL.
And what is something that you would recommend to listeners who are probably already fans of Lord of the Rings? So whether it's a TV show, a book, or something that you think they would also enjoy?
Well, I will say actually that I think N.K. Jemisin's duology, the first one is The Killing Moon and the second one is The Shadowed Sun. They're not like elves and orcs and wizards, but they are a really fascinating high fantasy 2-book series that's set in a world inspired by Egypt and other old African civilizations. So the magic is a completely different kind of system. And I think it's interesting to see because, so much of high fantasy is basically Lord of the Rings remixed in various ways. It's European. It's kind of all dealing with the same magical structure. But I find it super fun to see what a high fantasy looks like that's not based on, medieval Europe or the Norse sagas. So I would definitely recommend those 2 books, The Killing Moon and The Shadowed Sun by N.K. Jemisin.
That's awesome. Great. That's What I'm Talking About is a proud member of WBNE. You can learn more about that by going to WBNE.org. And might I suggest listening to Hello from Elsewhere, which is hosted by the always wonderful Valerie and Casey Winters.
Hi, I'm Valerie.
And I'm Casey.
And we're a married couple who loves to travel through fictional worlds.
On our podcast, Hello from Elsewhere, we dive deep into the themes and characters of movies and books, all through a positive lens.
We explore all your biggest questions, like what is Steven Spielberg's obsession with father figures?
What is the history of fictional maps?
And why are animated foxes so attractive?
Oh, Robin Hood.
From Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, and Jane Austen.
To Star Wars, Marvel, and classic Hollywood.
If it's pop culture, we're interested in exploring the meaning behind it.
With new episodes every other Friday, come visit us in Elsewhere.
The cover art is by Graphite, aka Vaishon Brandon. You can support him on Instagram at graphite.vmb. You can find the podcast on Twitter and Instagram at TolkienAboutPod, as well as join the Facebook group. There will be a link in the description. I suggest joining it because we share just lots of memes and jokes in there, and it's just fun. You can follow me on Twitter at MCWattsUp and Instagram, MC Turn Down for Watt. You can support the page. Oh, I need to get a sponsor of the week. The sponsor of the week. The sponsor of the week is Johan. Oh, I need to get my phone so I can read the pronunciation that you sent me. Okay, Johan, I am about to pronounce your name correctly. The sponsor of this week's episode is Johan. Yep, I definitely just said that correctly. That was definitely me and not a robot at all. Thank you, Johan, for your continued support of the show. It means a lot to me, especially during this awful, horrible time that we're all going through right now. If you want to support the podcast, you can do so at patreon.com/TolkienAboutPod. There you can access a lot of extra fun content, such as early access to bonus episodes when I do them, which I have been doing a lot of bonus episodes. So a couple weeks ago, the discussion question was to tell me what your favorite fictional monster is, or a monster that you just think is cool. In our Discord group, Brian said dragons and was wondering if they counted as monsters because usually they're kind of like they're more sentient or they're more intelligent. I think dragons count. Dragons have very cool mythology and everything behind them. They're very cool. Casey Winters, of course, gave like the most intellectual answer possible to this question. And he said Frankenstein's monster. And I'm like, well, I mean, fine. How dare you go be smart? I also agree with you that it's pretty cool. But also, Frankenstein's monster may be the monster, but the real monster is actually Frankenstein. Okay, and then a lot of people said Ungoliant, which I'm assuming is a monster I have not yet met. So we will see what happens when he or she or they make an appearance. The discussion question for this week is, when was the last time you were really excited to start of a TV show, a book series? What was the last time you were really excited to start the final book in a trilogy, or go see the final movie in a series, or watch the final season of a TV show? I'm really excited for the upcoming season of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. It's the last season, which I will be depressed about for the rest of my life. But it looks amazing because it's set in the 1930s and they're all hot. So I'm really excited for that to come out. I'm also excited for Return of the King, but they're not as hot. So tell me your answers on social media. So all that being said, do you have any parting words for our audience?
Oh, parting words. No, I'm just kind of dying to see what your response is to the movies, but that's like a ways away from you. So I guess for listeners, I hope that everybody has good reading material. We're all in such a weird life place right now, and so many things are so uncertain. And I don't know about y'all, but I am not having a lot of luck focusing on books. It's been hard to read. So I hope that if you are also having trouble reading, you have good other distractions.
Whew, ain't that the truth? And that's what I'm talking about. Like, coming up this week, there will be a bonus episode on Saturday. It is the Q&A episode for post Two Towers Return of the King. Wait, no. It will have already come out. I don't know what day it is anymore. Oh my God. You're listening to me have a breakdown live on microphone. Oh my God. I don't know what day it is. Okay. This past Saturday, there was a Q&A episode. So forget all that crap I said in the... I can't believe